Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we're creating a completely custom campaign in real time so you can see all the thoughts, decisions, questions, and concerns that go into my style of writing campaigns. I'm RJ Kerr, I'm your host as always, and today we're going to be continuing our Sea Shanty Siren adventure. In this uh, well, I should say it's more of an encounter than an adventure, if I'm really being honest here. It's a complex social encounter, and so we're really relying less on mechanics and more on social interactions between NPCs and the players, or the player characters, I should say. But before we jump into that, if you are watching this for the very first time, or you haven't caught up on some of the episodes with some of the recaps or what have you, or some of the recordings, what have you, let me go ahead and give you a quick summary of where we are, and so that you're not lost. So, like I said, we're building a custom campaign in real time with its own unique domain of dread. And to do this, we have adopted a story circle style structure to help us make sure we have all the pieces and parts that go into a good story. It helps us kind of track our progress through the campaign and give it a little bit of structure. Uh, we have also begun working on those various parts. We have done a lot of work into that category, in that area. There, we have figured out how the characters land in this domain of dread, and that's by going through a portal that opens up on the Blood Moon. We have figured out what kinds of motivations would draw our characters in through this portal of their own free will. We figured out where they land in this domain of dread in a shanty town that we're calling Darkport that sits on the edge of an inland sea. And we figured out that sea is a big part of this domain of dread, that it was once the basin of a thriving metropolis that is now fallen into ruin and been flooded. And that this domain contains the dread lord Ovander, who is an elemental evil that we're still trying to figure out exactly where he fits in to this adventure and how he affects it. We have also written the very first adventure for our characters here, one where they're kidnapped and briefly enslaved and have to escape their captors, and doing so, learn about the existence of a long lost artifact that gives the wielder some kind of power over the domain of dread. Thus, telling them that their best chance of getting out of here alive is to find that artifact, use its power, and escape. So now we're working on a part of the campaign where the characters are getting proactive, where they have lots and lots of agency to go out and look for this artifact. To do that, we're using a node structure style, and that is effectively where we have a group of nodes, or what I prefer to call them as investigative scenes, because I think that's more descriptive of them and more realistic. But effectively, they're moments in the overall adventure where the characters have the opportunity to find clues that lead them to another investigative scene where they can find more clues and so on and so forth. And so it gives us the opportunity to spread a whole bunch of clues around the world, giving our characters lots of options for where they want to explore and what leads they want to find, and giving them the ability to not find everything and still succeed. Uh, then we are populating all these little investigative scenes with varying levels of difficulty. Some are simple encounters, others are more complicated encounters, sort of like the Sea Shanty Siren one that we're building out right now. There are others that are full blown adventures. Um, the that are we've been using to build sort of like that we've used building the 5 room dungeon that we have used building a modified version of the 5 room dungeon called the 5 scene dungeon for a high style adventure. And so, in any case, they give us a lot of highs and lows. They give us some structure to work with as DMs, even in this very nebulous, open ended portion of the adventure. And so, today we're working on one of those complex encounters, the Sea Shanty Siren. And again, we've done a fair amount for this. We're pretty close to the end. These go together a lot faster than full-fledged adventures, just because, well, there's less to them, but that doesn't make them any less fun, and they can certainly still take up a full session. Uh, but let's go ahead and share my screen here, and so we can get rocking and rolling. Before we jump into this fully, remember this is an interactive live stream. So as you have comments, questions, concerns, or any other thoughts that you want to share, jump in the chat. We want to hear from you. You guys come up with some incredible input for this. Lots of creative ideas and questions and discussion points as we work through the process. To that end, we have Mr. Mex says, "Hey RJ, can you recall which episode of the series is the beginning of this adventure?" Off the top of my head, no, I can't. But I will find out for you, and I will let you know. I think we're on. Gosh, I want to say it's probably somewhere around episode 30, somewhere in there, maybe. But I'll find out specifically for you and let you know. All right. We already have spent some time really fleshing out the primary NPCs that take place in this adventure, where you have this predatory siren who's used to using her voice to lure creatures to her toll to feast on them. But she's recently had her voice stolen from her, and now she needs to steal somebody else's voice and wants the characters to do it. And she's got a short list of people that kind of meet her requirements. And so we spent some time building out the personality of the siren, since there's likely to be a lot of social interaction in there between the player characters and the siren herself. And so we have outlined some things to help us as DMs kind of navigate that social interaction with more finesse than just a few bullet points, or just I should say a sentence or two description. We have an objective. That's the thing that she wants right now. We have a value. That's what she wants overall in life. We have two values here where these are her core values. This can guide her in terms of her decisions, and they can come into conflict, creating real heavy decision points for her. We have a secret that the characters can find out and leverage against her. And then we have a description of her physically. Now, we figured out, or I should say, you guys had the great idea that they would be far more exciting if instead of stealing the voice had to be given up willingly. And so we also, that leads to another set of social encounters that are going to be very dynamic and perhaps very volatile. And so we spent a lot of time fleshing out those three options here. We have a bard, we have a priest, and we have a widow. And we went through and outlined not, their name, their location, basics like that, but also the dilemma. Why would they want to give up their voice, and why might they not want to give up their voice? And then we gave them the same objective, ambition, and values, and a secret, as we do for any thoroughly fleshed out NPC, as well as a clue that we can kind of sprinkle into the world to help our characters find that secret and leverage it. And we did that for all of those. For our priest, we also built out a quick deity to follow, which is something that we can now sprinkle around in the world here. So we've got a little deeper world building. And now we're working on adding some complications to this. We have built out some complications for if the characters fail to convince a particular NPC. And in doing so, we built out a whole reputation sort of system for this world, allowing the characters' actions to change how they're perceived in various settlements and interactions. And we've worked that into failure here. So if they fail to convince an NPC to give up their voice after making that attempt, then their reputation falls by 1 point within 24 hours, unless the PCs do something to mitigate this, such as silencing that NPC. We talked about doing some other additional location-specific setbacks. We might still build those out, but then we are also working on what happens in the case of success and how we might complicate the adventure for the characters in a realistic way that they might still have to face some challenges even after they get the voice. And the idea here is we want to make sure that this social encounter doesn't end up being just a couple rolls on persuasion checks and then it's a thumbs up and everybody's good. We want to have some challenge in there. So we were brainstorming last time, and we came up with some options where there's NPCs who are close to the characters, close to the NPC that gives up their voice, that object to the terms of the deal, and now want to stop the PCs and steal back the contract that binds their loved one's voice. So with that in mind, we built those out, and now we kind of need to define mechanically how these situations are going to work. So We have our bard who is frequently performs that should be frequently hosted. The tavern. Oh, sorry. The tavern where the bard normally performs is frequently hosted to an underground gang boss who has become particularly fond of the bard and their singing. When the bard gives up their voice, the tavern owner realizes it will upset the gang boss, whom he owes money to, and sends some local thugs to waylay the party and get the voice back. It's one option. We have our priest, who is the priest's acolyte, their most trusted, beloved acolyte, becomes aware of the bargaining signs that PCs are doing the work of the devil, which in this case, in this world, since it's not like a monotheistic or a dual theistic, it's probably the devil, as far as they're concerned, is probably a Vonder. And they must be stopped. And so he raises an angry mob to confront the PCs and attempt to have them burned at the stake. So we need to come up with some mob tactics for this. We need to figure out how that mob works. And then we have the ghost of the widow's spouse learns of the widow's bargain and comes to their true love's aid. They attempt to possess a PC and confront the party as a whole, resorting to violence if need be, in order to avoid the contract and return the voice to the widow. So we are going to figure out some of these mechanically. Some of these are easier than others. The ghost mechanic is pretty straightforward. We can simply, say they are a ghost, and there are possession rules within the monster manual for ghosts. And so we don't need to get too crazy with that. However, the bard is going to require a pretty straightforward sort of encounter because we're going to come up with a gang of thugs for this, and we're then and we can just kind of work that in as any kind of normal combat encounter. We might want to put a couple twists in there to make it a little more interesting than just a straight slog, but it's relatively straightforward. The priest one is going to be more complicated because we need to figure out how we're going to manage a mob. And in a way that feels realistic. And there are a number of methods for this. I don't know of anybody who has the quote unquote perfect solution for handling large, sort of large melees that have lots of enemies to it. But there are some good ones out there that may work for this or may not work for this. So we'll tackle that one. You know what? Let's do the hard one first. Let's tackle that one first, because that one's going to be the more interesting one, and we're going to want to, play with that a little bit here. So we've got another comment. Ben Elder says for the mob, perhaps reflavor a zombie horde stat block. Yeah, you could do that. So like I said, there's a couple of methodologies that you could do for this. You could build a swarm, as it were, right? We could take a stat block for commoners, or we can take another swarm stat block that already exists and build a swarm stat block for this mob, and probably divide it into chunks so it's just not one creature attacking, and instead have several kind of discrete groups within this mob that are taking actions. And so, something like, and I'm just pulling a number out of my head here, but something like, 4 swarms make up this mob. And then we have the acolyte in there as well, and they're their own stat block. We could do that way. And that might be the best way to do it. It's one of the methods that I prefer to do. I think swarms are underused and a lot of fun. But then there's also the school of thought that we could use something like Matt Colville's ideas, where he has adapted. I want to say there's some of the 4th edition rules that he's adapted for this, but don't quote me on that. Where he's got some rules about setting up mob combat where you effectively reduce all the HP of each of the of each of the creatures in there to 1. If you want to make them tougher, you give them a damage threshold. The idea being, if you don't inflict so much damage on a single hit, then no damage is applied to that NPC, and that the mob kind of attacks as 1, and their attack rolls and their damage is affected by the number of creatures still in this mob. And so you've got to still have to carve through them one at a time. He also allows cleave rules for that kind of thing, and there's a whole system for it, which can be really cool if you are doing a big if you do a lot of mob combat. I think it's worth using that system sometimes. And or if you're doing something where you have a big moment, like a massive zombie horde or something like that, or the whole town rises up in this capacity. Yeah, Jonathan Frost says fourth edition minions. Yeah, effectively that's what he sort of modeled this on. Was that minions mod? Was that minions idea? And it works pretty well. So it's one option. I think for what we're doing here, building out some swarms, I think is probably the easiest way to do this and the fastest way to run this, since this is one potential encounter and not a guaranteed moment, where yeah, we're you know fighting their way through a swarm of people is not necessarily the desired outcome. So let's work on that. Let's build some swarms. So I've got D&D Beyond up on the side here. One of the suggestions that Ben Elder had here was that the swarm stat block should have attacks that can envelop and restrain. Yeah, absolutely. Swarms in particular tend to have a range on their attacks of 0 feet. Maybe the swarm has to occupy the space of a creature to affect it. So that is definitely an option here. Let us, like I said, I got D&D Beyond up on the other screen here. Let's go to source books. Let's go to Monster Manual here, because we're gonna want some ideas. Is there? I want to say they did add a zombie swarm stat block, but I could be wrong. So I'm just looking through the list here. Let's see. I think I might be wrong. Yeah, it looks like I am. It doesn't look like there's a zombie swarm stat block in the new DMG, but that doesn't mean we can't build one. And frankly, we want to build it as a stat block of commoners, most likely, because that's sort of who they're going to be facing. So we can get a little creative with that. So let us. So we're going to say he raises an angry mob, and we're going to say X. Swarm of commoners. We're just going to queue ourselves there. I will say that I generally, when I'm kind of annotating this, prefer to have some statement in there that's like, hey, this encounter contains an acolyte and X number of swarm of commoners, just so that it's like a quick reference for me when I'm actually running this. So I can glance, see that sentence, and go, okay, this is everything I need to have ready on the table. Another comment here, Jonathan Frost says, reflavor an ooze. We might steal from the oozes a little bit here, but we're going to start with the swarms. We're going to start with swarms. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull a couple swarms up on the kind of on the side here, just so that I've got some things to kind of compare to as we're doing this. I'm also going to pull the stat block for commoners up, which is pretty simple here. Okay, cool. So let's say game rules, monsters, and search commoners. And I'm pretty sure at this point I probably have their stats memorized, but still good to have them up as a reference. Okay. So let's step out of this for a minute and let's go back over to our NPCs and monsters here. And let us create one. And let's say monster stat block. And we're going to say swarm of commoners. And I will admit that I have not updated this stat block to match the 2024 yet, or this template to match 2024 yet. So we will make changes as required. So let's see. So let's first think about size. A commoner is a medium-sized creature. And let's say typical swarms are either large or medium-sized, and they're made of tiny creatures. So we might say that looks like most of them are medium. So we'll either say this is large or huge. Probably large in this case. We'll take a step up here. We'll say it's large. Let's see here how they mark this. So we're going to say that this is a large swarm of I'm going to change my mind. We're going to make them huge. We're going to make it huge. And we can modify that as we want, but I think we're going to start with it being huge. It just feels more mobby to me if we have a couple huge groups on the battlefield here. And we're going to say they're unaligned. Okay. So let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe a rule could be made to make the mob more dangerous. Lost to the crowd if PC goes to 0 hit points. They do not roll death saving throws. Instead, they are instantly carried away. It's like something to consider. Yeah. To that end, why don't we work on some special traits here to start instead of jumping straight into like armor class and hit points, because we'll figure all that kind of stuff out mechanically based off of what kind of challenge rating we want. So let's say okay. Let's go ahead and start with what we know is going to be here. We're going to say swarm, because that's a standardized trait here. And we can say the swarm can occupy another creature's space and vice versa. The swarm can move through any opening large enough for a medium-sized creature. The swarm can't regain hit points or gain temporary hit points. That's just kind of standard for swarm rules, right? We're just pulling that straight out of the various swarm stat blocks. If you kind of scroll through and you see that they've all got that. We've also got some immunities that are common to them and some resistances that are common to them. So we're going to go ahead and work those in here. Let's go ahead and say they're not going to have any skills, so we can remove that. We're just going to say resistances. And we're going to say bludgeoning piercing, and slashing from magical and non-magical weapons. And the reason that I'm doing this is that you think of a crowd here, right? We've got a whole swarm of people here. You swing a sword. It's easier for you to miss somebody, than to hit, and that doesn't change whether it's magical or non-magical. It just, there's going to be some that's lost through the attack here, as the swarm kind of moves around you and isn't just a solid entity here. Same for bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, all that kind of stuff here. Then we're going to have some immunities. And we've got charmed, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, prone, restrained, stunned. All things that a swarm can experience. Individuals in the swarm might be able to experience that, but taken as a whole, they don't take that in here. Let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe a high perception check could reveal the acolyte at some point, and if they manage to kill or wound him, the mob becomes frightened or just gets disadvantage. Yeah, we could certainly work that into the situation. I don't know that. I don't know that I would require a perception check to reveal the acolyte. I think that as they're kind of goading this mob on, they're probably pretty apparent. They just might be at the back of it as opposed to being at the front of it. So to that end, kind of, as long as we're talking about the makeup of a swarm, I kind of imagine these things as your typical, we're gonna go fight Frankenstein's monster kind of swarm, right? So it's villagers with torches and pitchforks and stuff like that. So I think it would be cool if we had both piercing, if the swarm's melee attacks did both piercing and fire damage, the PCs are attacked with pokey things like pitchforks, and people are trying to club them with torches. Yeah. So let's do. Let's note that here. We're going to say piercing, image, and I'm going to copy my annotation here real quick. We'll figure out the actual damage later. I don't need the brackets there. Not writing this to put it into D&D Beyond. Mr. Mex, you can do it. Yeah. I imagine the acolyte absolutely in the back being like, go get them, everyone, go. And then Ben Elder says 100 villagers versus 1 PC. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of fun in a lot of ways. And frankly, if you want to give your characters the feel of being truly kind of outclassed by the volume of the creatures that they're facing, then using the modified version of the minion rules is a really cool way to do that. It requires some more accounting. It requires a little more effort on the DM's part, but it can feel very overwhelming for the characters, whereas the swarms don't always have that same psychological effect. Jonathan Frost says, or we could do Mr. Mex's favorite grapple restrain. Nope, we can't, because swarms are immune to grapple and restrain. And then Orth says, look at all those villagers offering up free XP. Yeah, this is exactly why I do milestone in my games, because you don't want the players metagaming that way and going, ooh, if we kill all the peasants, we'll get all their XP. Or at least I don't want them operating that way. You can run your games however you want. Cool. So let's also brainstorm a couple of mechanics while we still have a few minutes here left, or a couple special traits. Um, so we had the idea, or I should say, Ben had the idea of lost to the crowd or lost to the crowd. All right, let's put that in here and we'll put TBD on exactly how we're going to write that out. So that's an interesting idea here. We also, what else would an angry mob have that would be interesting here? Hmm. We talked about, Ben, you mentioned attacks that envelop and restrain. And in enveloping, we've kind of got the swarm ability here. But restraining, um, hmm, maybe. Um, because I imagine more of it becoming like the mob sort of like moves around one of the adventurers and they're stabbing with pitchforks and swinging torches and they're not necessarily trying to hold down that individual. Um, so, but let's see here if we can come up with anything else. Um, hmm. Maybe not. Maybe we won't. Maybe there's nothing else too. But I like the lost in the crowd mechanic. I like that for sure. That the body kind of gets carried away. Um, um, ooh, okay. What if we did a press mechanic, right? Where it's not so much that the PCs are going to get restrained by the attack here, but that just the volume of people can push them back potentially. Can sort of they can kind of swarm and press against the characters, potentially knocking them back or knocking them down. Um, yeah. Mr. Mech says they could potentially try to capture the party and do some sort of town justice sacrifice type deal. Yeah, I think that ultimately, I like that idea that that's kind of their goal is that they're not, the crowd's not trying to kill the party straight out of the gate. They're gonna have them over and brought to the stake and tried and then burnt. Um, it says like the Monty Python Duck witch trial. Yeah. It's as much of a hoax as that is. So let's say crowd press, and we'll figure out exactly what that means at a later date. Mr. Mech says try to convert them or something, and the group can undergo conversion therapy, making checks to resistance. That could be funny. That absolutely could be funny. All right. So we are at our time for today. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I look forward to building out this new kind of monster for our adventure here next time. If you have enjoyed this stream, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps the stream grow, gets more people in here, and keeps these chats as dynamic as they always are. You guys always participate, and you make this so much more fun. So thank you for that. If you want to check out one of my games, you can check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ You can find both sort of open games that I've posted there, but you can also request custom games, whether those are campaigns or one-shots, homebrew, or modules. Any of that kind of stuff is on the table. So again, I thank you all for joining me, and I will see you all next week. Talk to you soon. Bye now.